Crypto Reality presents. First, get out of your own way.
This is the Loxahatchee Slough natural area. It's a part of the Grassy Waters Preserve. And this is where I had my first close encounter. 1,000 yards from where I stand right now. Does this look like a place you would find a Bigfoot? Because I sure as hell wasn't expecting it. And that's because my perspective on all of this was manipulated from the start.
Okay, so this is the spot where I had my first close encounter on the very first expedition out looking in the field. At this point in my field research there was a great deal of skepticism about everything that I was seeing on the internet, in books, on television shows. And I look at it like that is what held me back in the first place from going into the field. That's what really contributed to me waiting so long. Yes, I did a ton of online research, but the bottom line was I wasn't convinced to the point where I was willing to endure any physical effort over the issue at all. This was literally the very first time that I went into the field to just take a look. And here I am confronted with something that is so profound right off the bat that I just couldn't believe it. I'd just come from the game warden's office. It was about a mile from here. And I was inquiring about whether or not they kept reports on sightings inside the parks. Now, this is the outskirting edge of the Grassy Waters Preserve. This would be the north end of the Grassy Waters Preserve. And I was inquiring specifically about the report on the BFRO about the couple that witnessed a Bigfoot, a bush Indian, feeding at the base of some cypress trees, digging down in the cypress trees, and then putting things in its mouth. Digging in the cypress tree and putting things in its mouth. And that sighting carried a lot of weight with me. And specifically because there were 4 people involved. Now, my subsequent requests in the park to obtain a copy of the report or get some type of confirmation on it were all denied. Basically, I was told, we don't keep reports on something like that in the first place. And the probability of something like that happening is next to none, and I got the runaround. When the bottom line is it's been cited in that preserve 50 times in the last 50 years, And since that day, I've talked to 3 different people who I met in the actual park that were hiking there that saw a bush Indian, a Bigfoot, walking through the cypress. And that's one of the reasons they continue to go back. They just aren't into, sharing that they had this encounter, but they're amazed by it. And so when they started to deny me access or deny that the report even existed, I said, well, you know what? That's okay. I'll do a little field research in here. And at that point, they started telling me I'd have to pull permits, and they were going to be thousands of dollars, and I'd need to speak to the park director. So basically, they were trying to discourage that kind of thing at the same time as denying all of this. And I said to the guy, listen, I can come in this park anytime I want, and I can shoot film all goddamn day. There ain't no official permits I need to pull. I'm not a scientist. I'm an amateur wildlife photographer. You're telling me I got to pull permits? Well, what about the other people taking pictures? So I argued my point, at which point he said, if you're in here under official, research, then you have to pull permits. And I said, well, this is unofficial. In any case, I decided not to use that main entrance. And I had an attitude. Boy, I was angry about it because, I was already on to the fact that this was actually going on here in Palm Beach County from that BFRO report and everything that was witnessed. So I decided to check, other areas of the park. And I left the main entrance and I was driving down the side of the highway heading east. and I saw the 8-foot perimeter fence.
In 1992, I worked for the fence company that built all 9 miles of the fence that surrounds the Grassy Waters Preserve along Beeline Highway. At the end, we were instructed to put barbed wire on top of the fences and face the barbed wire to the inside of the park. When we asked the officials why they wanted us to do that, they responded, I guess they're trying to keep something in the park.
It has 2 feet of barbed wire on top of it. There was about a 20-foot long tree trunk that was smashed down on it. Problem is there was no forest where the tree trunk was, and it had smashed the entire fence down to about probably my chest level from, you know, considerable height. So I pulled in and I looked, and you could see where the tree trunk had been dragged through the swamp prairie, the foot of water or so. You could see a tremendous, you know, 150, 175 yard drag mark all the way through the swamp from the tree line a considerable distance away. Like I said, 150, 175 yards. And then I looked on the top, and the tree trunk, the bark was all worn off. And what it appeared to me was that somebody, it takes hands, so somebody had actually dragged that tree over to the fence, threw it on the fence, and walked up it to get out of the park. I looked across the street, and on the other side, the fence was pulled down as well. The barbed wire was ripped down, and the crossbar at the top bar was bent down, probably to chest level again, in a huge dip. So I had signs of something trying to get out of the park, and obviously it takes intelligence and hands to do that. And then on the other side of the highway, in the other side of the park, on the south side of the park, here is the fence pulled down. So I looked for an immediate spot to get into the park from outside of the main entrance. Well, I showed up here, and this is what the place looks like now. And it's a little overgrown, as you can see. But the bottom line is I walked down this road, and when I got approximately 300 yards from here, and I had my fishing pole, so I was fishing the canal down on this side, a little bit further this way. I was fishing the canal on the canal bank. Now, as I walked and fished this canal bank, looking behind me at the bush on this side, I was really focused on fishing, but I'd gotten down to this area a couple hundred yards down, and I came upon a very large rock, about this big. And the rock itself was flat on the top, and it had big snails and freshwater mussels all smashed up on it. And the meat from inside was all gone. And it didn't surprise me at that point. I mean, I thought it was curious, but we have otters down here. Now, they don't normally, typically, they won't be in this type of canal because it's a drainage canal, and there's a lot of moving water. They move water through here quite a bit. So I haven't seen one in this particular thing. They're in the park, in some of the water and canals in the park, but they're stagnant, and you know, it's not the same situation. This canal, they move hundreds of millions of gallons of water through this every year. So, but at the same time, I had no, you know, I mean, it didn't make sense that it was, you know, a bush Indian or a Bigfoot. And so I looked at that, and I stood there for a minute, and then suddenly it caught my attention that there was another rock about this big, probably 5 to 7 pounds, and it had the snails crushed all over it. Now I was really looking, and the bottom line is, you know, it takes hands to do that with a rock of that. I mean, it was a considerable size. So I had these 2 rocks. One was obviously used to smash the snails and the mussels. And then I started looking a little closer, and there were weeds from in the canal, and you can see the canal is full of weeds, pulled out onto the shore. So I walked over to the area where they were pulled out, and there were 2 16.5-inch, 17-inch punch holes, foot tracks underwater, punch holes, where the weed was out, where somebody with extremely large feet had walked down into that canal and pulled the weeds out and started grabbing at snails. This canal is full of huge snails and freshwater mussels right now. And at that point, when I saw the tracks, my blood ran cold, because I couldn't believe what was happening. It seemed like, you know, it was impossible what I was seeing. In dealing with what I did when I saw the 2 tracks that were in the water, the punch holes, and of course if they're underwater and they were about 9 or 10 inches in the water, under the water, probably that much water, is when you see something like that, the edges will collapse. You're never going to get a definable track underwater. However, it was the shape of a left foot, and then the other one was the shape of a right foot, and they were enormous. So now I'm standing there and I'm in a complete state of disbelief, because this is literally, I mean, the road is like right here. Look at this. That's the road right there. So here I am. I'm, you know, basically staring at something that there's only 2 things it could have been. It was either a really big homeless guy that, you know, obviously was starving to be eating snails out of the canal, or it was a Bigfoot. And like I said, we have a history in this exact spot I'm standing over the course of the last 60 years, 70 years, of people living on the edge of our civilization, and this is right on the edge. This is where the swamp and the forest corridor begins. This is the furthest east that the forest corridor comes. In this place, I'm literally sitting 1,000 yards from a prominent golfing community, and that's the golfing community over there. You can see. I'll zoom in for you. We've got homes and golf courses, man, all through here. And you know, the bottom line is in looking at all this, I just didn't think that it could be real. There's no possible way in my mind. I was like, you know, this is something that it shouldn't even be happening, although it's right here. We got the snails, we got the rocks, we got the footprints. So I looked up the canal bank and promptly saw another track at the top that was indiscernible, but it was obvious it was the same gigantic foot. And then I started to walk over to this area over here, and man, I got a skunk whiff right now. I don't know, man, but I walked in and the fence was pulled down. There was a fence here, and the fence was pulled down. This is a couple years later, so everything's grown in, and it was a lot different on that day. These trees were very small, and you could walk in there. I stepped over the fence and I went inside and promptly found a 16-inch track in the grass, at which point I was like having a conniption fit, because I thought, okay, you know, first of all, I'm standing here and my track leaves no mark whatsoever. The grass bounces right back up, and this is some heavy, you know, gator grass. I mean, the grass here, you know, is a combination of gator grass, what we call, Floridians call gator grass, and bahia or bahia. There's a couple different ways people pronounce it, but the bottom line is my track or my foot or my weight at 230 pounds did not leave a discernible track, and this imprint was considerable. You can take a look at it now because I actually filmed the imprint. Through that entire experience up to that point, now I had 2 discernible punch holes from left to right feet, 16 inches approximately, 16 and a half, in the canal. I had one at the top of the trail that was indiscernible, but obviously something had stepped there with the same very wide foot. And then I had a really discernible imprint. And what's important about this right now, at this point in the whole process of what was happening, is that although my mind, because of the way I was trained to think about this subject through absorption of the programming in the past, and everything that they say about, you know, and everything we see, where this is in the middle of nowhere. This is not happening like close to you. We have to take helicopters into these areas to go find these guys. Like, you know, the bottom line is like I'm not expecting it. I mean, right here. I mean, I thought it was ridiculous, but now I started to add up the evidence. I had the log that was dragged to the tree line, the fence that was pulled down across the street. I come down here, I got the apple snails and the mussels smashed on the rock using another rock that had to be 5 to 7 pounds. Then I got tracks in the water. The weeds are pulled out. I've got evidence of hands and big feet. That's two different aspects of what I'm actually looking for as a researcher. But even though I had that, I was still saying to myself, there's no way this is going on. There's just no way. I was in a state of disbelief. And that's when I talk about the programming and how it affects your perception is what is a large part of why the species is invalidated. Because it literally is our own preclusions and belief system holding us back from truly understanding and just coming to the proper conclusions, preventing us from remaining objective in situations where we may encounter evidence in the field. This is something that you have got to get over if you're going to start doing this. Bottom line is right then, when that was happening to me, I had to recenter myself and develop an objective state of mind just to say, okay, well, let me go check this out. You know what I mean? First of all, I'm by myself and I'm getting ready to go into thick bush, which is, you know, in and of itself uncomfortable, let alone the fact that at this point I'm going in the bush specifically to follow up on the possibility that a 7 to 9 foot individual covered in hair who's probably used to killing things with his own 2 hands could possibly be in there. Because in all reality, the eyewitnesses are telling the truth. So really, what it comes down to is, can you remain objective when you do find the evidence enough? Can you remain objective enough when you do find the evidence to then begin to follow it up? And really understanding what it represents so that you can then stay safe is very important. I make no bones about the fact that when I go into these areas and I'm by myself, because I believe that when you're by yourself, they're more apt to come towards you, and that's been my experience, that you are taking your life in your own hands. I don't care what anybody tells you. I'm not saying they're a violent species. What I'm saying is I've always witnessed them move in the opposite direction when I was with at least one other person. Whereas in Research Area 4 and 4A, when I've been by myself, repeatedly, and I've entered into that area that we call the den by myself, they've moved towards me. And there's no getting around that. You're hearing walking of gigantic people coming through the bushes on you. I mean, there's big footsteps coming from 2 different directions, and the bushes, it sounds like there's 2 water buffaloes pushing through, but with human steps, and they seem to swim through the bushes. The noise amount when they do come towards you is so drastic because I believe they use their arms, so you hear the footsteps, but you're also hearing them clear the bush with the right arm and the left arm as they go through. Now, technically, the lesser human primates and a lot of the non-human primates do something called brachiating. And I think that comparison is, is definitely something, I mean, humans brachiate. Okay, so identifying that term as something that's identified with a gorilla, a chimpanzee, or, a non-human primate is ridiculous. We move things out of our way when we walk. We grab things to help pull ourselves up if we're hiking uphill. This is not something that humans don't do. It's like the old adage that, gorillas are known to throw things. Sasquatch throws things. Well, yeah, I mean, we play football. We play baseball. You know what I mean? Humans do all those things as well. Yet, in the programming, you'll always see it identified with a picture of a gorilla when they talk about how gorillas throw things, and they'll show like one throw a stick at, one of the researchers or something. Well, man, I mean, I've thrown plenty of shit at people. Trust me. I'm sure you have as well, We throw things too, and that's not necessarily, that's where the programming starts to confuse people because they'll talk about, about how, Sasquatch is the North American ape, and technically humans, man, is in that family hominae with gorillas and chimpanzees and, whatever else they have in there. if after they say those things, they don't show pictures of the actual Sasquatch, but they instead visually reinforce the belief or the term ape with a picture of a gorilla, how important it is it going to be to the public then, you know? So I had confronted my own disbelief. As I got over that fence and I found that track, I really started to feel uncomfortable. And I looked up in front of me, and through the clearing where the grass was, suddenly there was a large wall of jungle bush, and it was just looked like almost impenetrable. And there was a tunnel, a perfectly symmetrical tunnel. And I started to look at it, and I was like, what is this? I walked up to it. It was about 50 inches wide, about 8 feet high, and it had been created with hands. The branches all the way up and down on the ceiling, all the way around the sides, were all broken off. Everything was twisted and broken, and then I was like having a panic attack. At that point, I was thinking, oh my God, you know, we either got a big homeless guy here that's like really, really big, or this is really happening and there is actually a Bigfoot here. Well, I chose to go in. You know, something in my mind always says, you know, the truth. I want the truth. I want the truth. And regardless of whether I was by myself, I chose to go in, and, you know, I got in about 70 yards, I guess, 50 yards maybe, 50 to 70 yards. And it was under a canopy. This tunnel went all the way in, and it was like winding around corners, and there were, you know, of course there were vines and everything in there, and it wasn't perfect. There was a lot of mud, and you could see that there were hogs going through there. However, hogs don't twist branches off 6 feet up, 5 feet up, 10 feet, you know what I mean? It was crazy. And I watched this all the way in. I came to a little clearing still under the canopy, and there was a big tree, and there was mud all around the base of the tree, and there were 4 tracks, 16-inch, perfect toes, everything. And at this point, I was so shocked that I was not filming anything. I didn't even, it never even crossed my mind to turn my phone on because of the state of disbelief I was in. I mean, there's things running through my head that I just couldn't even imagine. I kept thinking, this thing's gonna kill me. If it's here, it's gonna kill me, it's gonna get me. And for one reasons unknown, I just went at the top of my lungs 3 times. At which point, as soon as I finished the 3rd call, I heard a moan, a very clear, like a man. And it was just on the other side of the big tree, and there were more bushes, and the tunnel continued. But on the left side of that big tree, and I had to go over like this to kind of see around the tree. The bushes were real thick. I heard the moan. I looked, and the moan appeared to be like, it sounded like it was coming from on the ground. I then heard what sounded like someone very large get to their feet. It just sounded like, you know, like 2 steps, like rustling, and the bushes moving. And I was, you know, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. And at that point, I can only describe it like this. A gigantic man screamed back at me and mimicked the exact 3 screams that I did in the exact length, but on the 3rd one, the 2nd and the 3rd one, he added an inflection of sarcasm, emotional intelligence. I felt like I had just woke him up, and he was displaying, he was like, it was like, I felt embarrassed. That's the feeling that was going through me. I felt ashamed that I had woke this person up. And at that point, you know, I was frozen. I mean, I was so in just a complete state of disbelief of what was going on that, you know, I just froze. And I was staring at the spot, and then he took off, and it sounded like, you know, a giant was running on 2 legs, man. Boom, 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 gush, gush, and bushes. And I peeled off and took off in the opposite direction, promptly fell down. My phone flew out of my hands. I hunted real quick and scrambled, and I ran through the tunnel. I tripped. There were vines. My arms were scrumming. I was like, oh God, oh God. And I was like actively, like, I was so freaked out. Like, I can remember it right now, and it's kind of shaking me up. The emotion that I felt, honestly, when he took off, I thought he was coming towards me. It was instantaneous, so I just panicked. I had a complete fight or flight thing, and I chose to flee. And I must have fell down on the way out, running, screaming with these like guttural sounds 4 or 5 times. And I was cut up, and just, I mean, nothing was gonna stop me. Anything in my way, I was plowing through. And you know, I mean, it was so at which point I came out from the area down here, and I ran all the way down this trail this way, all the way back to the car, around that corner, down that way to my car that was parked and waiting. And at that point, I slid across the hood. I actually did a hood slide. I was going so fast, and at that time, I'm an ex-smoker, so I actually was like having chest pains, man. I was freaking out, you know what I mean? Like, I thought I was gonna die, and I figured he was behind me. I never even looked back. I left my fishing pole at the trailhead, and my tackle bag, and my knapsack. Anyway, I got over, and I peeked up over the hood, and a semi rolled by. I mean, you can hear the trucks. We're on the side of a major highway. And when the semi went by, I was parked on the side of the road, so the semi was within 6-7 feet of me, and it just scared the shit out of me, man. But it kind of brought me out of the situation for a second. And then I was just like, I sat there and I was gagging for breath because, you know, like I said, I hadn't quit smoking yet, and that was, you know, I was a heavy smoker for a long time, and which, you know, I've since quit and immensely better. But the bottom line is like, you know, I thought, you know, I almost vomited, and you know, I just still couldn't believe what was happening. I was struggling in my head to actually come to the conclusion that I wasn't still asleep in my bed. Those were the thoughts going through my head. This is not real. There's no way. That's the level of denial that the public has. And I'm someone who, at this point, was a believer. I believed it. There's a difference between believing without evidence. Belief requires faith. Knowing something is when you have evidence. And at that point, I was on the precipice of actually knowing. And in those seconds that followed, I came to the conclusion, the stark conclusion, the uncomfortable, the unavoidable truth about all of this, that actually did just happen to me. And it dumbfounded me. It dumbfounded me. I just had my first close encounter on the very first time that I went out into the field. Within an hour of actually pulling into the game warden's office, I had a 20-minute argument there, and I came here within an hour of being in the field. Here I am now, irrefutably, this just happened. So the first thing that came to my mind, because I had just spoke to the game wardens and they gave me the runaround about everything, was I was fucking furious. Now, there were a lot of things going through my head, but the main thing that I couldn't escape from was the conclusion that I had been lied to by these people that run this place. Or that they were unaware, but I felt like they were lying to me, just the general attitude that I got when I spoke to them. So, you know, I started to, you know, really look at the situation like, you know, this is wrong, and I don't appreciate this. You know, what just happened to me was so significant that how is it that no one could know this? It didn't make sense. I knew absolutely at that point that someone had to know in official position, and it's specifically because I wasn't in the middle of nowhere. We don't have in the middle of nowhere necessarily. Like you go up in the mountains in, say, Tennessee, you have in the middle of nowhere. This is a forest corridor that's, you know, 15 miles thick, but on each side of it is civilization and agriculture and a big, huge metropolitan city, and so there's this corridor here, you know what I mean? And in this particular spot, it's probably 15 miles thick. It does get thicker in other areas, but I mean, you know, just west of here is another ranching community or an equestrian community called Colusa. I mean, I was pissed. That's the bottom line. And now I knew. And so, I was going to do something about it. That's me. So when we talk about denial, what we really need to understand when we talk about skepticism and denial is that this is not a unique perspective to, certain individuals. This is everyone. This is me. This is you. There are going to be situations that you are confronted with if you choose to do this. And obviously, if you're here now watching, you've already joined and, you've made a decision that you want to at least, check it out. What you have to understand absolutely is that there is no comfortable in any of this. We were never taught that this was real. And every step of the way that you find evidence, you will feel uncomfortable. There are also a bunch of really interesting feelings that come with it. I get so excited, when I'm going on an expedition in the morning, I have knots in my stomach, man, because I'm an eyewitness on 3 occasions now. I've had 3 sightings. So, I've caught them on film, all these tracks we find. And but that doesn't mean that, I don't still get uncomfortable when I'm off by myself and I have time to think about what's going on, because it's uncomfortable. These guys that are out here, these Bigfoot, these bush Indians, are so physically superior to us and so indifferent to man. You can sense the indifference. There's this thing that goes on once you start to find evidence and you maybe have a sighting or you catch them on film. There's a real sense of the indifference that they have towards us, and I'll just say it like that. I don't know what happened in the past between us and them, but something did, and I don't know who they perceive us to be. I know our perceptions are twisted, but there's a lot to be learned from field research about this, and it has nothing to do with, I caught him on film and my ego's big, or the social media shit that we all endure as field researchers. And trust me, if you pursue this, we're going to show you how to deal with it in the right way, to where you don't have to do and go through the learning curve as with everything that we've had to go through to get to the point that we're at. But I guess what I'm really trying to say is that you need to prepare yourself psychologically, because this is happening. Okay, so you're here now, and you've obviously, chose to click on getting started. And so this is getting started. Getting started requires that you begin to look at yourself first and foremost, and your own perspectives on this subject. Getting started the way I had to get started will take you 15 years. So when we talk about cutting the learning curve, the very first thing in this process to begin your field research campaign is you have to begin to look at your perspectives on the subject. And you have to take yourself back to square one, to objectivity. You have got to relinquish your grip on skepticism. You've got to relinquish your grip on denial of the information that you are going to receive in real field research. You have to remain objective, and there's no way around that. So the only way you can do that is to constantly focus on yourself and any type of belief system that you may have currently, especially if it's skeptical or you have a certain level of denial about the subject. Otherwise, it's going to take you a lot longer to accomplish what you are in fact here to accomplish.